Olá, galera. Boa tarde. Sejam bem-vindos. Hello, guys. Good afternoon. Welcome. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Ben Bikman. Let's go. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Veronica. Welcome. That's great. Let's go. I'm very, very excited to be here today to talk to Dr. Ben Bikman. He is one of my idols in science. He is, I have a short bio of him. He earned his Ph.D. in bioenergetics and was a postdoctoral fellow with the Duke National University of Singapore in metabolic disorders. Currently, his professional focus as a scientist and professor, he is professor at Brigham Young University, is to better understand the role of elevated insulin and nutrient metabolism in regulating obesity, diabetes, and dementia. He is one of my idols in science. He is the author of the book Why We Get Sick. It's one of the best books I ever read. I read it 3 times already. And he's already here. Let's dive. Hello, Dr. Ben Bikman.
Hey, Enrique. Am I saying your name right? Enrique?
Yeah, Enrique. That's
Enrique.
great.
Okay, wonderful. And please call me Ben.
Okay, Ben. Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure. This is so much fun. I have a deep affection for Brazil. My older brother lives in Curitiba. So I think
that's interesting.
In fact, we will be visiting Brazil next year. I will let you know when.
Okay. So let's make a deal and we can meet in person.
I would love it.
That would be great. That would be great. So that's a great honor for me to have you here on my channel, talking a little bit with my audience. I am a great fan of your work, and I'd like you to tell about your journey into insulin resistance. How did you get here? How was what was the click that made you research about insulin resistance?
Yeah, there were a lot of moments in my career. The one that stands out the most was when I was a young master's student, so just a brand new graduate student, and I found a paper that described how when fat cells start to get big, they start to release proteins that increase inflammation in the body. And this increased inflammation would make cells throughout the body less responsive to insulin. And this would make it harder to control glucose, and thus it would lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. That idea was so interesting to me that between obesity and type 2 diabetes was inflammation. And it was the inflammation then that would cause insulin resistance, which was the first step of type 2 diabetes. It was that one paper. I remember reading this one scientific paper, and that put me on the path that I've never stepped off in almost 15 years now, or more actually, almost 20 years of doing this.
That's very interesting. And let's dive in our subject. And what is insulin resistant and what causes it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so insulin resistance is 2 things. It's a coin with 2 sides. On one side of the coin is what we call insulin resistance, where the hormone insulin isn't working like it should. Now, some people misunderstand that, and they think that means insulin isn't working very well everywhere in the body, but that's not true. It's that it's not working very well at some cells of the body, but it's working perfectly well at other cells of the body. So it's not equal in how it's not working. Some places it works okay, some places it doesn't. And I'll give an example in just a moment. But on the other side of the coin, again, this is still insulin resistance. You have 2 things that come. So one is that insulin is changed how it's working, and two, blood insulin levels are much higher than they were before. So that's something called hyperinsulinemia, so high insulin. Now this matters because let's take the two most common forms of infertility in women and men. In women, the most common infertility is a disease called polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, we say in English. PCOS. This is when she's not ovulating very well, her estrogen levels are too low to enable normal ovulation, and her testosterone levels are too high. And so she sometimes will have more hair on her face. Sometimes she will start to go thin on top of her head like some men do. And so that's PCOS. That is a disease of too much insulin, where the insulin is working very, very well in her body, but at the ovaries, it's working really well. So she has insulin resistance, the high insulin, and it starts to inhibit the ovaries' ability to produce normal sex hormones. Too little estrogen, too much testosterone, and now she has PCOS. But in men, the most common form of infertility is called erectile dysfunction. And this isn't a problem of too much insulin. Now it is a problem of insulin not working very well. Insulin is needed for normal dilation of blood vessels, when a blood vessel will open to allow more blood flow. That, of course, is necessary for normal erectile function. But when the blood vessel becomes insulin resistant, now insulin can't help that happen, and the blood vessel stays very constricted, and that results in erectile dysfunction. But both of these are problems of insulin resistance, the coin with two sides. It's just that each of them is a function of one side of the coin, not both, but they always come together. So that's what insulin resistance is. And then you'd asked about the causes. Very briefly, there are three main causes of insulin resistance. One is inflammation, that I said earlier. When the body has a higher immune response, or the immunity is turned on too high, that will create insulin resistance. Number two is stress. The key stress hormones, which are cortisol and epinephrine, when the stress hormones are turned on, they also promote insulin resistance. Insulin isn't working as well, and the insulin levels in the blood go higher. Remember, those two things always go together. And then lastly, the third one is when insulin levels are too high for too long. This is the one that I think is most important, because it's so common that we snack all the time. We are always eating, whether it's Brazil or in the United States, people just eat. We just eat. Yeah. We have food all around us. We snack in between every meal, and we're always snacking on foods that are increasing our insulin level. It's these refined starches and sugars. So insulin is always high, and the more insulin is elevated, the more the body becomes resistant to it. And I like to focus on that one because it's hard to control inflammation sometimes, and it might not be important to an individual. It's difficult to control stress all the time, but it is very easy to control insulin. The moment we start controlling what goes in our mouth, insulin will come down.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And is there a genetic cause of insulin resistance? Is there some SNPs that can play a role in that?
Absolutely. Although, yes, so Enrique, we do know that genetics matter, but we just don't know all of the genes that matter. And so, in other words, you could look at someone who has a parent with insulin resistance, but that child will very likely have insulin resistance more than someone else will. So we know that it's genetic, it will follow a family. We just don't have identified a specific set of genes.
Yeah, and you said that the first and most important cause of insulin resistance is the caloric abundance that we have today, that we are snacking every time and eating foods that elevates insulin. Is there any chance that hypercaloric ketogenic diets make us insulin resistant, make us diabetical?
Yeah. So that I have never seen. So Enrique, if I understood your question right, you're asking if someone was hypercaloric but low carb ketogenic, could that create insulin resistance? Is that what you asked? Yeah. That's a very, very good question. There's never, ever been a study that answers the question you're asking. I think if it would be very, very difficult. There have been studies that are called overfeeding studies, where you give, these have been done a lot in animals, of course, where you give the animals the same amount of calories and you give them a lot of calorie to try to make them fat. It is very, very hard to make an animal fat on a ketogenic diet. I know we've done these kinds of experiments. They just can't eat it. They don't want to eat it anymore. You try to force them to eat it and they just don't want it. But if you have high fat and high sugar, but even if it's same calories, it's just a little less fat, a little sugar, they will eat that all the time and they will get happy and fat, be happy and fat. So I think if we were to take a person and tell the person, you eat 3,000 calories a day and it's purely ketogenic, high protein, high fat, very low carb, I think that would not, I'm speculating, I think that they would not become insulin resistant. What would happen is that the body would have to account for those calories, though, and the metabolic rate would go up. Metabolic rate does go up when insulin is low. We've published papers on this, others have too. This has been known for over 100 years. When insulin is low, metabolic rate is about 200 to 300 calories higher than normal. So the body will just start burning more, but at the same time, if a person is in ketosis, they're making ketones from all of the fat that they're burning, and we start breathing ketones out, or we urinate them out into the toilet. So a ketone is a molecule that has energy. It has a caloric value. And so now, rather than having to store that energy, now we're literally breathing out the energy in the form of ketones. Yeah. So the body has these mechanisms to say, okay, we have lots of calories coming in, but insulin is low, so I can't really store it. We just have to find new ways to spend it, to get rid of it.
Yeah, but is it true that a ketogenic diet will make some tissues insulin resistant?
Yeah. So some people will say that a ketogenic diet causes physiological insulin resistance, and that is not true. It is not true. It is based on a misunderstanding. Now, let me explain very briefly. Insulin resistance, the insulin resistance that I study in my lab and that what I talk about and have been talking about today so far is insulin resistance called pathological insulin resistance, or the insulin resistance that makes us sick, that what makes us infertile or diabetic or Alzheimer's or heart disease. But there is other insulin resistance where the body becomes insulin resistant for a purpose. And that's called physiological insulin resistance. And I bet your audience already knows all of this. But the physiological insulin resistance happens in 2 times in a person's life. And not even in all people. In puberty, everyone who goes through puberty, when they go from child to adulthood, they will have physiological insulin resistance. And second, from pregnancy. When a woman is pregnant, during the course of her pregnancy, she'll become more and more insulin resistant, and the baby is born. And then she becomes insulin sensitive again, especially very quickly if she breastfeeds. If she nurses her baby, she becomes insulin sensitive very, very quickly and goes back to normal. That helps. In the body, in a ketogenic state, this is, we say the body's insulin resistant, but they're actually very, very insulin sensitive. When we have our animals on a ketogenic diet, if we give them an injection of insulin, the glucose drops very, very quickly. So they're very, very sensitive to insulin, which immediately challenges the idea that it's insulin resistance. There is no insulin resistance. Yeah. But what happens in animals and in humans, if a human's on a ketogenic diet and then they go to a clinic and they drink 75 grams of glucose, an oral glucose tolerance test, normally in a healthy person, the glucose comes up and down. And at 2 hours, it's back down to normal. However, if someone is healthy but on a ketogenic diet, it goes up and it takes longer to come down. It doesn't come down at the 2 hours. And so people will say, oh, it's because you're insulin resistant, because that is what happens if someone's insulin resistant. But no, what happens on a ketogenic diet, and this even happens if someone fasts for one day. Even if someone eats a bunch of carbs and they go into the clinic, but they fasted for too long, what happens is the pancreas has two ways to release insulin. When we drink glucose, the pancreas will release insulin in two phases. First, there will be a very immediate bump, the first phase of insulin release, bumps up. And then there's the big second phase of insulin release. The second phase of insulin release, the big one, is when the beta cells of the pancreas make new insulin. It makes insulin fresh. However, the first phase of insulin release is when the beta cells have insulin already packaged, ready to go. And then the beta cells will see all the glucose come in, and then the pancreas will just say, okay, we have all of this insulin right now, let's just release all of this insulin, and then any of the extra insulin we need, we will just make it. However, the beta cells of the pancreas, when glucose isn't coming in, even after about 15 hours or so, the beta cells will start getting rid of their insulin. They tell themselves, hey, we have all of this insulin here. We don't need all of this because there's no glucose coming in. So let's just break down the insulin that we have. So what happens with fasting or a ketogenic diet is we temporarily have no first phase of insulin release. So a person on a ketogenic diet, they go drink the solution. There's no first phase. It's just waits, and then it goes up into the second phase. And so it just takes longer for the glucose to clear. However, if that same person went back to the clinic 6 hours later, the beta cells basically get the message, oh, okay, we're eating insulin again now. Now the first phase is back, and they will pass the glucose tolerance test perfectly well.
Great. That's excellent. Recently, we have a kind of a polemic here in Brazil about this subject, and your explanation was perfect. Good. And Ben, what do you think about this eternal fight between calories in, calories out model, and insulin model? Is there a kind
for obesity
of there to summarize the real concept?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mean the insulin theory or the caloric theory for obesity? Yeah. I love that you asked this question because I think about it a great deal. Yes, so some people will say that obesity is purely too much insulin. Some people will say obesity is purely too much calories. Well, I don't say this because I want to be a politician, but I think the truth is both. That you cannot have fat cells get big without insulin being elevated. It is impossible. We grow fat cells in my lab. I'm at my home right now. But if we were to go to my lab on my university campus, we have fat cells growing in little dishes. We have in the fat cell bath, there's lots of calories. And the fat cells stay very, very small. They will not grow, even though there's lots of calories. Once we start putting insulin in the bath, now the cells know what to do with all of that calories, and they start to get big with all of that energy, and they grow. So a fat cell cannot grow unless insulin is elevated. However, as I said, though, the insulin tells the fat cell to get big, but then it isn't actually making the energy or the fuel for the growth. That comes from nutrients, that comes from calories. And so you have to have both an insulin and sufficient calories to stimulate the growth. If you only have one or the other, then things get difficult. In fact, you cannot have high insulin and low calorie. It is impossible. You will die because insulin will start to push all of the energy out of the blood. We know this happens in humans. When insulin is high, glucose will come down, fats will come down in the blood, but that's because food has been coming in, and so we can push it out of the blood. However, if there's no energy coming in, like if we went to someone and just gave them a big insulin injection, their blood glucose would drop, their ketones would drop, their fats would drop, and the brain would have no energy and they would go unconscious. So you cannot pull these two apart. Human obesity is an increase in insulin and enough energy to grow the fat cell as much as insulin wants the fat cell to grow. Because hormones, especially insulin, tell cells, especially fat cells, what to do with energy. It's not just a matter of putting energy in the body. pushing it in. No, the cells of the body have to be told what to do with the energy, and insulin tells the body to store it. So you need both.
Okay, that's great. And what about a ketogenic diet? Is there a downside for doing a ketogenic diet for life?
Yeah, there is no evidence that it is a problem long term. We know that there are people who are on ketogenic diets their whole life to control their epilepsy, their seizures, and they have normal, healthy lives, indeed better than trying to treat their disease with other things. Now, please, I don't want people to hear me say that and think that I am saying everyone should be on a ketogenic diet forever. I am not saying that, but I will. To say this another way, I never want to be looked at as someone who's advocating or telling people go on a ketogenic diet. No, but I will defend it because there is so much misunderstanding around ketogenic diets. I will defend it just based on the available science that has been conducted. So I think it would not be. I think especially for children. Young children that are growing, I think that they should be allowed to eat more carbohydrates. I think milk that mommy is making for baby is high in all three macronutrients. It is high in carbohydrate, protein, and fat. I think that is a good diet for children that are growing. And then once we are adults and we're done growing, then I think it is important that we be more careful with our carbohydrates than we needed to when we were children.
Yeah. I think that too, and I always say that we have to adequate the diet to the person that are in front of us. I'm a nutritionist here in Brazil, and I never do only one type of diet. I kind of adapt the diet to the person that are in front of me.
Yeah, it should be based on what their outcomes are. If you have someone who's overweight and type 2 diabetic, ketogenic diet is going to work very, very well. If you have someone who's very lean and they want to train for a marathon, well, then I would say this isn't going to be as smart of a diet.
Yeah. And we have another war. Now we have the sickle war, calories versus insulin, and we have the war fructose versus seed oils versus refined carbohydrates. And what do you think about this war? Who wins?
Yeah. So if we were to say, who's the culprit for causing insulin resistance and obesity and diabetes, you're right. There are very different lines. Some people will say that it's the refined carbohydrates. In fact, maybe we could even say it's two. It's refined carbohydrates, including fructose, which would fit in that. Because the nice thing about a low-carb diet is it gets rid of the fructose. As well, because that is, of course, a carbohydrate. But on the other side, people will say, well, it's just seed oils. I respect both because my view on refined carbohydrates, it isn't the carbohydrate itself, it's what it does to insulin. So my view is that insulin resistance is caused by chronically elevated insulin. I can defend this very, very well. There are studies in humans and rodents and cells, isolated cells, that will prove that elevated insulin causes insulin resistance. However, seed oils also will cause insulin resistance at fat cells. The main fat in seed oils is called linoleic acid. And when you have fat cells growing in a little dish, like I do in my lab, and you add linoleic acid into the bath, and then you test how they respond to insulin, their response to insulin will go down. And so it's very difficult for me to say it's this one or it's this one. The fact is they always come together. Because if someone is eating refined carbohydrates, they go and get a bag of potato chips. That's going to have both. Or they go and get a bag of crackers. And so much of the junk food we eat is both refined carbohydrates and refined oils. I think if someone is going on a low-carb diet, they start eating fewer refined carbohydrates, they eat less packaged foods, that automatically means they eat less seed oils, and so it ends up working well.
Yeah, you talk about fructose. I think you talk about soda and juices. What about fruits? Is there a place for fruits in our diet?
Oh, I think so. But there was a study just published from the Middle East that found it was a study that had people looking at how much fruit they were eating, and the people who ate the most amount of fruit had the most insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. But even still, I think it is safe to look at fruit, whole fruit, not juice fruit, as you say. And my view is, my first rule of nutrition is control carbohydrates. That doesn't mean zero carbohydrates. That doesn't mean no, very, very little, but it would just mean be smart about your carbohydrates. And for me, that means don't get your carbohydrates from packages. Get your carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables. But if this was someone who has type 2 diabetes, where they might be eating bananas all the time or mangoes, those are very sugary fruits. And I would say, be careful with those. Eat less of those, but have more berries, for example. And so I think fruits and vegetables can be very, very good if we eat them as less processed as possible.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little about talking about politics, a little politics. You said in your book that the guidelines, the American guidelines back in the 80s, was an attempt to bend science to fit politics, especially about saturated fat.
Yeah.
Do you think you can revert this approach? Do you think we can sometime tell people that saturated fat isn't that bad?
Yeah, I am optimistic that it's going to happen, in part because some of the big medical entities in the United States have already started changing some of the way they speak about this. For example, the American Diabetes Association is the big diabetes association, biggest in the world, and it's certainly the biggest in the US. They just recently changed their dietary guidelines to say that a low carbohydrate diet will improve glucose levels better than any other diet. And so I think that this is slowly moving forward, and that the attention that people are putting onto seed oils and the evidence that has already been there for decades to show that the seed oils are the problem, not the saturated fat. I am optimistic. I do believe the day is coming when policy will start to change, but it should have never been that way in the first place. All of the recommendations, as I mentioned in my book, that say was bad science.
Yeah, and Nina Teicholz in her book Big Fat Surprise is very clear about it. Included
Yes.
Your book and Nina Teicholz's book was the only one that I read 3 times.
Oh, that's nice. I am in good company. Yes, Nina's book is very, very good. In fact, Enrique, I think I mentioned her book explicitly to say, I mentioned this a little bit, and then I said, go read her book for a lot more.
Yeah, you said that. And about this, the people our audience are asking about honey. What do you think about honey?
Yeah, I know honey. It's very interesting for me to see how conflicted people have become with honey. And I know that's because there are some social media influencers who are kind of carnivore, but they really love honey and they say everyone should be eating honey. I think honey is nature's purest form of candy. But I also think in its raw, unpasteurized state, in controlled amounts, honey can have healthy immune properties. There have been studies in humans to show that raw honey can improve allergies in humans. But I think that nowadays we go too far. Once upon a time, our ancestors would have found bees and a hive, and they would have enjoyed all of that honey and chewed the honeycomb and enjoyed it. And then they wouldn't have honey for 2 weeks or a month, or however long until they found more. My view is that's how we should eat honey too. That as much as people say, well, our ancestors ate honey. Well, of course they did, when they could find it and when they were willing to get bee stings all over their arms and body.
Yeah, I think so. And talking about our ancestors, what do you think about the evolutive mismatch that we have today? Is there any proof that it is a cause of obesity and cardiovascular disease? And do you think that if we return to a kind of ancestor living, we can put this behind?
Sorry, what was the first part of your question?
What do you think about the evolutive mismatch?
The evolutionary mismatch?
Evolutionary mismatch, yeah.
Yeah, so that idea is, I believe it's based on this idea that the human body is built to want to store energy in case we can't get more energy later. Basically, we can eat now, it's feast and famine, feast and famine. We eat when we can and store any energy because there's going to be a time when we can't eat, and so it'll be good to have this energy stored. It's a very compelling idea, even though there's not a very clear genetic signature, because nowadays we know that some people tend to gain weight more easily and will be fatter than someone else. This isn't because they have a higher metabolic rate or lower metabolic rate. It is not metabolic rate, but there are other variables that will make it easier for some people to gain weight and easier for other people to keep the weight off. Theoretically, the people who tend to be leaner, we would say, oh, well, they would die if they lived 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago because they don't store much energy. But usually what happens in people who are leaner than other people, the most common cause is they don't eat as much as they think they do. They actually just don't eat very often. They will eat and they eat and then they're done and they're content. They're not snacking 30 minutes later. They're not eating ice cream at midnight. And so it is not as much that there's some metabolic advantage to that individual. However, there's no question that the environment that we find ourselves in right now, which is that we have food at any moment we want it, and it is this delicious mix of high sugar and high fat, and that is the yummiest mix of anything. High sugar, high fat. Any animal will eat that all the time because it is so good. Mice, rats, dogs, bears, humans, doesn't matter. If there's high fat, high sugar, they will eat it. That will be the preference. And we have it all around us anytime we want it. And so I would say that's the mismatch. It is that we play tricks. We basically set ourselves up to fail because we take the yummiest mix of things and we have it available for everyone. That, I think, is the mismatch, is that we take our brains and we play on our natural desires for sugar and fat, and we mix them together, and so we naturally want to eat it all the time.
Yeah, you're right. I think that you do. So, based on what you said, if we start eating like our ancestors, we can kind of revert the problem.
I think, yeah, to a degree. And I don't mean to say that we should all eat like cavemen or the paleo diet necessarily, but I think there's great wisdom in that, which is basically eat lots of animal foods, meats and dairy and eggs, and eat very low refined carbohydrates. That would be it. That if we focus on protein and fat, and that's the majority of our diet, and then it's fruits and vegetables as kind of the extra, that's a perfect way to eat.
And if you see some tribes, some ancestral tribes that are living today, we have exactly that composition, that food composition. We have the Inuits that are a little more protein. We have the Tsimane that have a little more carbohydrates. One thing that they have in common is they are not having ultra processed foods.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the carbohydrates that they're eating are kind of whole tuber. They're not powdering them up and frying them in seed oils to make a potato chip.
Yeah, and even if they powdered it, they cannot powder as our industrial meals can do.
That's right. In fact, that is very important. There have been animal studies that give the animals the exact same number of calories, but they come in a different form. On one hand, the animals have little pellets that they have to chew. They're chewing it. On the other, the exact same amount of energy, it's been pulverized into like a powdery paste. And they can just lick it super easily. No chewing required. This animal gets fatter than this animal. Even though it's the same food, same amount, but the work of chewing it and eating it just makes it less calorie, less energy coming in.
That's very interesting. Dr. Bikman, I want to be respectful with your time. And I'd like to know what are your personal strategies to maintain your shape, and not just for shape, but mind. I think I see that you are a family guy. You like to play with your kids, be with your wife. I admire that. I try to be I try to be like this too. What are your personal strategies for life?
Well, Enrique, it's very important for me to also have a good figure, because when I come to Brazil next year, I want to really look good in a Speedo. So I also, so I need to make sure I keep things very tight. So for me, an average day is that I may or may not eat breakfast. And usually it depends on what my workout was like yesterday. And if I had a very hard workout and I feel like I still need to recover, then I will eat breakfast. Otherwise, I won't. And so then I will just fast through breakfast. Drink water, though. And maybe sometimes even I will drink like yerba mate or some kind of tea-like drink. And then I will have a big lunch. I try to let lunch be my biggest meal. And sometimes it is a meal replacement shake, or like a lot of it, or I go out to eat with some of my professor colleagues, and I will eat a lot. But it's lots of meat, very, very low carbohydrate, usually. Like Brazilian barbecue, for example. I will do that sometimes. We have some restaurants here in Utah that are Brazilian barbecue restaurants. They come and they cut the meat off, and they put it on your plate.
That's the best ones.
Oh, it's so yummy. When I come to Brazil, Enrique, me and you, we will go get some.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
And then dinner is usually, for me, dinner is whatever the family is eating for dinner. Whatever my wife or my children have made for dinner, I will eat dinner with my family. If it is higher carbohydrate than I want, then I will just try to eat a little less of that and a little more of the protein and fat. But I will eat dinner with my family, and then no snacking. I have dinner, and then I just do my very, very best to be done, and so that I do not go to bed with a full stomach. That is I am convinced, one of the reasons so many people sleep so poorly nowadays isn't just because of the screen in their face. It's also because if they go to bed with a very full stomach and high glucose levels, that actually activates stress in the body. And now the heart is beating harder and faster, and their blood pressure is higher, and the person's lying in bed and they're thinking, why is my heart beating so fast? I'm not worrying about anything. I'm not anxious about anything. I'm very calm. But it's because they have increased their glucose so high because they ate a bunch of ice cream and candy before they went to bed. And high glucose activates the sympathetic nervous system. It makes them feel nervous or anxious, and now they don't sleep well, and they're tired, and they have more stress, and then their metabolic problems keep getting worse. So that's kind of my view. I just eat a bigger lunch, a relatively smaller dinner, and then I just try to be done. After dinner, I'm done. I will drink, certainly. Sometimes I will have a diet soda, although not caffeinated, maybe, just to have a sweet taste, but that's it.
And what kind of workout do you do?
Yeah, so my workout is very traditional, where I like to work out 5 days a week, and sometimes on Saturday too, just going on a run. But Monday, Wednesday, Friday are lower body days. I make sure that my legs get more attention than my upper body. And then Tuesday and Thursday is upper body. And usually when I do my legs, lower body, I lift weights. I'm in the gym at my university. But when I do my upper body, I don't lift weights. I just do body weight. Just lots of different types of pull-ups and lots of different types of push-ups and handstands, walking on my hands. That's how I just do my upper body. I don't need weights for upper body.
That's interesting. And do you have? I see that you have an Oura ring.
So I'm not wearing that right now, but yes, every night when I go to bed, I will wear my Oura ring. I like it because it usually, I'm very surprised at how insightful or how smart the ring is. It's been very motivating for me because the ring, I'll wake up in the morning and it will say, you didn't sleep well, which I don't sleep very well often. But it will say, did you eat something wrong? Because the ring knows that if you eat a lot before you go to bed, you won't sleep well. And so the Aura Ring for me has been a good motivation. It helps me to have an objective analysis where I can look at my phone the next morning and say, okay, I'm really going to work out hard today. Or it will say, hey, you didn't rest well, work out a little lighter. And I will do that, and I absolutely feel better.
Interesting. So tell us a little about your new book. Is that true? You are writing?
Yeah. So my first book, Why We Get Sick, was mostly about insulin resistance, what it is, where it comes from, and why it matters. And then a little bit was what to do about it. But there wasn't so much there because I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not an exercise coach. Even though I have thoughts about all of these things, I didn't want to focus on that in the book because I said I'm not really qualified to talk about that. So my book publisher came to me about 6 months ago and said, this first, Why We Get Sick it's been going well. Let's make a next book more about how to identify insulin resistance and then what to do about it. So it's much more meal planning and more exercise, but I have a co-author because I told my publisher, I would love to do this, but I can't make diets. I can't make exercise plans. I'm not good at that. And so I have a co-author named Diana, and so she's helping me write that part of the book. But it will come out not until about 1 year away.
Okay. And is there any plan to translate your first book to Portuguese?
Oh, I hope. So it's very interesting to me. I did not know this at first. A book is only translated if there is a publisher in that country who wants to publish it. So, for example, we have a Spanish version. It's because there was a Spanish book publisher who came to me and us and said, we want to buy the rights, the ability to translate your book into Spanish or in Chinese or in Polish. It's because there is a company, a Polish publishing company. So if there is a Portuguese publishing company that will want to, then email me, and then the book can get translated into Portuguese. And that company in Brazil, for example, would be the company to translate it and to publish it. They would print it and they would take care of the selling of the book directly.
It will be really great. It will become my favorite gift for all my parents, patients, and everybody gonna present.
Well, if anybody listening knows someone who works in book publishing for Portuguese books, then email me or DM me.
Excellent. So Ben, we're just getting to the end of the live. You said you have 45 minutes, and I want to be respectful with your time. And I want you to give a final message. I always ask book recommendation for my guests because I'm a nerd. I love to read. You can see that I have too much books. Yeah. And I always ask a book reference. It doesn't have to be a nutrition or diet book. It could be a book that make a good impression on you.
Yeah. In fact, I will show you the book I'm reading right now because I have always been very interested in economics. As much as I study metabolism, economics is something that interests me very, very much. I am loving this book, The Fiat Standard. It is a very, very interesting book. It is all about economies and currencies and monies and why government uses some monies. I think it's very important that we understand these kinds of things. But for me, it makes me more and more interested to have a way to own things that can't just be printed by the government, for example. Like a good example is we pay to own some cows. And I want to be able to own my own meat and to, be able to get milk from those cows. And it's something I think is very, very important that we make sure we have, that we are smart about where we put our resources and how we spend our money. Anyway, very, very interesting book. I think people would really enjoy it.
Great, great. My friend, thank you very much for being here. It was a great honor to talk to you. And I hope when you get here in Brazil, we can meet in person. I will be thrilled with your presence. And if I know Curitiba is a little cold, but I live in Fortaleza, it's northeast of Brazil. We have sunshine every year, all the year. So if you wanna get some beach, put your Speedo.
Yes.
Here it's going to be a great place to show off your hard.
Hey, I will let you know. I would love that. Would be so much fun. We should organize an event. I will do some talks if we need to.
That'll be great. That'll be great. Thank you very much.
This was wonderful. Thanks, Enrique. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.